Let's talk about a court case that started with something pretty ordinary, an accidental fall on a sidewalk, but ended up changing the rules for police responsibility in a huge way. It really all boils down to one critical question.
Then you'd think the answer would be straightforward, but for the longest time it was incredibly complicated. One landmark case, though, finally cut through all the noise, and it all started with a pretty unlucky, everyday kind of incident. So here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with the actual story of what happened. Then we'll get into the big legal idea at the center of it all. We'll follow the case's messy journey through the courts, see how the Supreme Court finally set the record straight, and then, most importantly, we'll talk about why this whole thing matters to all of us.
Okay, so first things first, let's get into the incident itself. This is really a story about an ordinary person who just happened to be in the wrong place at the absolute worst time.
Picture this. It's 2008. A 76-year-old woman, Mrs. Robinson, is just walking down the street minding her own business. All of a sudden, police officers are trying to arrest a suspect right nearby. A struggle breaks out, they all tumble over, and in the process, they knock Mrs. Robinson to the ground and she gets injured. Now, it wasn't on purpose, but her injury was a direct result of what the officers were doing.
And that right there is the million-dollar question that kicked this whole thing off. The police argued, hey, we were just doing our job, keeping the public safe, but Mrs. Robinson's lawyers argued, yeah, but you were careless. This exact conflict forced the courts to take a really hard look at a fundamental legal idea.
And that brings us to the main event, the concept at the very heart of this case, the duty of care. So what on earth is a duty of care? Well, in plain English, it's just the basic legal rule that you can't be careless in a way that you could reasonably expect would hurt somebody else. The huge question here was, does that same rule apply to police officers when they're on the job?
Here's a super simple analogy. When you're driving a car, you have a duty of care to watch out for pedestrians. You can't just be reckless. Mrs. Robinson's argument was basically that police have a similar duty not to carelessly harm bystanders during an arrest. Seems totally logical, right? Well, for years, the legal system was tied in knots over this exact point. Before this landed in the highest court, Mrs. Robinson's case went on a wild ride through the legal system. And the results? They were completely contradictory. It was a real head-scratcher.
I mean, check this out. First, the High Court sided with Mrs. Robinson. They said, yup, the police were negligent. But then, the case went up to the Court of Appeal, and they did a complete 180. They said nope, the police did not owe her a duty of care because giving them a kind of immunity was important so they could do their jobs effectively. Total legal whiplash.
So why all the back and forth? Well, a lot of the confusion came from this really complex and old legal idea called the Caparo test. The courts were just getting lost in the weeds trying to apply this complicated framework, when, as we're about to see, the answer was actually much, much simpler.
And here is the turning point. After all that confusion, the case finally reached the UK's highest court. The Supreme Court was ready to step in and just settle it once and for all. And their final word was powerful and perfectly clear. Lord Reed said, and I quote, "The police are subject to a duty of care to avoid causing foreseeable personal injury to another person. No special exceptions. No get-out-of-jail-free card. The same rules that apply to regular citizens also apply to the police."
And their logic was refreshingly simple. 1. Police officers are not above the law. 2. If you're doing something that could obviously hurt someone, you have a duty to be careful. And 3, and this is the really big one, in cases where an officer's direct action causes harm, you don't need all those complicated legal tests about immunity. The duty of care just applies. Period.
Okay, so what does all of this actually mean in the real world? Why is this one case so important for both the police and for us, the public?
Well, this ruling brought some much-needed clarity. It confirms that police are accountable and they are not immune from negligence law. It protects all of us by making sure officers have to consider the safety of bystanders. But maybe the most crucial thing it did was draw a very clear line. The court said police are liable for the harm they actively cause, which is different from being liable for failing to protect someone from harm caused by somebody else. That distinction is everything.
So if you remember one thing, make it this. Yes, we want the police to protect us, but the Robinson case established, without a doubt, that they have to do that job with a reasonable amount of care for the innocent people around them.
You know, this case settled a huge question about physical harm, but it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? As policing keeps evolving, with new technology and new challenges,
How is this fundamental principle of a duty of care going to apply to other kinds of potential harm down the road? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for watching.